There are storms that rattle windows and fade by morning, and there are storms that leave something behind. This story belongs to the second kind. The year was 1792, in the far moors of Yorkshire, where the sky stretched endless and the wind seemed to speak in a human voice. That night, lightning came before the rain. The villagers said it moved like it was alive, crawling down the clouds rather than striking from them. The storm arrived just as Wren went into labor. Her husband Matthew paced across their small cottage, whispering prayers that turned to trembling apologies. Every flash of light cut across the ceiling, showing his wife's face pale and wet with sweat, her eyes wide as if she were looking at something neither he nor the midwife could see. "She's watching me," Ellen murmured again and again, her voice hoarse. The midwife, Mrs. Rainsford, tried to hush her. "You're only in pain, dear. There's no one here but us." But Ellen's gaze didn't move. It stayed fixed on the dark corner above the bed. Outside, the wind howled so hard the chimney groaned. The thunder rolled in long, hollow tones. Not cracks, not rumbles, but something more like a word being spoken by the sky itself. Then came the blinding white flash, followed by silence. The church steeple in Hollowmere was struck miles away, its cross torn clean off. And in that same instant, the child came into the world. She didn't cry. Mrs. Rainsford waited for the first gasp, the first squirm of life. Instead, the baby only stared. Her eyes were open, not the dull, unfocused gaze of a newborn, but clear, silvery, aware. The midwife felt her breath catch. "Ellen," she whispered, "she's breathing, but not like—" She stopped, realizing that though the baby's chest rose and fell faintly, her lips didn't part. It was as though something else, unseen, was breathing for her. Ellen reached out with trembling hands, half in fear. "Is she alive?" "Yes," said Mrs. Rainsford, "but she hasn't blinked." The candle beside the bed flickered and went out, though no draught moved through the room. When the midwife lit it again, the baby's eyes followed the flame perfectly, unblinking. The pupils were large and dark, but the reflection within them wasn't the light of the candle. It was something deeper, like the shimmer you see in water before a storm breaks. Ellen wrapped the child close, whispering the name she had chosen, Eliza. But the way she said it, trembling, was less a name and more a warning. By morning, the storm had broken. The sun rose pale and uncertain, the moors steaming in low mist. But inside the Wren cottage, it was colder than before. Mrs. Rainsford hadn't dared leave until dawn. She sat by the cradle all night, her eyes fixed on the baby. The air around the child felt thin, as though breathing too close might steal the warmth from your lungs. Eliza didn't sleep. She lay silent, eyes open, watching the light shift on the ceiling. When Ellen finally dozed off, Matthew leaned over the cradle and covered it gently with a cloth, whispering a prayer. He turned away for just a moment. When he looked back, the cloth was gone, lying neatly folded at the foot of the bed, damp with something cold. A week passed before anyone from the village came to see the baby. By then, Hollowmere had already made up its stories. They said lightning had marked her, that a spirit had come through the clouds and breathed into the newborn's chest. 3 women arrived at the Wren house carrying bread and salt, old protection customs. They meant well, but curiosity always walks beside kindness. When one of them leaned over the cradle, she gasped. "She's watching me," she whispered. The baby's eyes seemed to follow every movement, even the slight tremor of her breath. The woman swore she saw her own reflection move inside those eyes, but not at the same time as she did. As if the baby saw her seconds before she moved. Another villager claimed the child smiled at her. But when Ellen looked down, Eliza's mouth was still. That night, Ellen covered the cradle again, this time tying the cloth. She could not bear the sight of those eyes. Yet each morning she found the fabric neatly folded again, and once placed on the windowsill, dusted with frost. Though no window had been opened, Matthew tried to dismiss it all as imagination, as grief mixed with fear. But even he couldn't explain what happened one silent midnight. The cradle began to rock on its own, slow, steady, as though an invisible hand soothed the air above it. No wind, no tremor, nothing that should have moved it. Ellen sat nearby, her face hollow in candlelight. When Mrs. Rainsford returned days later, she found her there, still pale, eyes ringed with sleeplessness. The midwife whispered, "Does she cry at all?" Ellen shook her head. "No, but sometimes in the dark I hear her humming, not with her mouth." With the room, Mrs. Rainsford stepped closer. The baby lay perfectly still, hands folded, eyes fixed on the ceiling beam. Yet from somewhere, low and distant, came a vibration, faint but constant, like a voice pressed between the walls. The flame in the candle shrank until it was a red pin of light. The closer she leaned, the harder it became to breathe, as if her chest was being drawn toward the cradle. She stumbled back, gasping. "Ellen, take her out," she hissed. Ellen didn't move. "If I take her out," she whispered, "the storm will come back." That night wind returned to the moor. But there was no thunder, no rain, only whispers long and drawn, circling the house like someone pacing just outside the door. When the baby turned 3 months old, Matthew buried the family's dog. The animal had been found stiff by the hearth, eyes open, staring at the cradle. After that, he began locking the windows, nailing the shutters. But no matter what he did, the frost returned each morning, traced in the shape of small fingers across the panes. Mrs. Rainsford stopped visiting. The next time she passed the cottage on her way to the mill, she saw Ellen standing in the field, holding the baby up toward the grey sky. It wasn't morning or night, just that dim hour between. The woman wasn't praying, she was listening. Her face looked peaceful, almost serene. When she saw the midwife, she smiled faintly and said, "She likes the cold. It's quieter up there." After that, no one saw Ellen for days. The constable found the house empty. The fire had long since died. The cradle was overturned, the linen stiff with frost. In the corner of the room, carved into the wall, were small circles, hundreds of them, no bigger than a coin, etched so deep they bled through to the outer wood. Each one was perfectly round, except one larger at the center, shaped like an open eye. They found Ellen's body 3 miles down the moor, lying on her back in the snow. Her eyes were wide open, mouth slightly parted, but there was no sign of the baby. When they carried her home, Mrs. Rainsford wept. Matthew refused to speak. He left Hollowmere 2 days later, saying nothing except this: "When she was born, I heard something in the thunder. It said my name." Years passed, and the moor swallowed what was left of the Wren cottage. Travellers sometimes claimed to see a faint light there on storm nights, not lightning, but something smaller, lower to the ground. Some said it looked like a lantern moving between the mist. Others said it was a pair of eyes. And when thunder rolled across Hollowmere again, the old people would whisper, "Don't watch the storm too long. It watches back." The moors of Hollowmere were not kind to the living. They had a way of holding on to things that should have faded. Sound, shadow, and sometimes memory. After Ellen Wren's death and the baby's disappearance, the story should have ended. The cottage rotted into the soil. The wind stripped its roof clean, and the fields grew back over what had been a home. But the villagers say that when the fog returns each autumn, a faint light still moves there, slow and searching, like someone walking with a lantern through the mist. They call it the Wren light. At first, people thought it was just a trick of fog and moon. But the light didn't behave like either. It moved against the wind. Sometimes it glowed blue-white, as if lit by lightning trapped inside glass. The shepherds who stayed too long in the moors said it flickered in rhythm like breathing. In 1805, 13 years after the storm, a traveller named Thomas Bell passed through Hollowmere. He was a schoolteacher from Whitby, hired to take up post in a nearby parish. A quiet, rational man, he boarded at the inn, a leaning timber building that smelled of smoke and damp wool. That night, as rain whispered against the windows, the innkeeper's wife told him about the light on the moor. She said it came every year when the air turned cold, always near where the Wren cottage once stood. Don't go looking for it, she warned. Third follows those who do. Belle smiled politely, the way educated men did when faced with superstition. But that night he couldn't sleep. There was a strange sound beneath the wind, like a child's sigh drawn out for too long. By dawn the mist had thickened, swallowing the world beyond the hedgerows. Belle took his lantern and set out toward the fields, driven by the arrogance of reason. The grass was slick, the air cold enough to burn the throat. He followed the faint path that wound past the old churchyard and up toward the moor. The deeper he went, the quieter it became. Even his footsteps seemed muffled, as though the fog drank the sound before it reached his ears. He found the ruins of the Wren house, just as the innkeeper's wife had described. Nothing but a low shape beneath moss and stone, the corners marked by rotted beams. The air smelled faintly of soot, though no fire had burned there in years. He raised his lantern, peering into the mist. Something flickered back. At first he thought it was the reflection of his own light, but it hovered too far away, across the field, low to the ground, pulsing gently like the heartbeat of a sleeping thing. Belle took a few steps closer. The light didn't fade or vanish as misty tricks usually did. It brightened. He called out, "Is someone there?" The fog shifted, curling like breath from unseen lips. The light moved, not away but closer, slow, steady. He could almost hear it, a faint hum beneath the silence, like glass resonating under a fingertip. "Who's there?" he said again, louder now. But the moment the words left his mouth, he wished he hadn't. The fog stirred in response, not by wind, but like something within it turned its head. The light blinked once like an eye and began to drift sideways. Belle followed. Each step sank into the wet earth. The ground grew softer until water seeped into his boots. Still he pressed on, transfixed. The lantern in his hand began to dim, its flame shrinking without smoke. He lifted it higher, squinting through the thickening mist. Then he saw her, a figure faint standing in the field. Small, slight, the shape of a child. Her outline wavered, half made of fog, but her face was there, pale as milk. Her eyes caught the light like polished metal. "Little one," Belle whispered. "Are you lost?" The girl tilted her head, the way owls do when they study something they don't quite understand. Her hair clung to her face, dripping though there was no rain. The air between them was freezing, yet Belle felt heat rise behind his eyes, that strange warmth of fever or fear. She lifted her hand, not toward him but toward the lantern he held, and as she did, his flame flickered in perfect rhythm with the blue-white glow behind her. Two lights breathing together. For a moment he saw the shape more clearly, not just a girl but something around her, threads of light spiraling from her body, like strands of lightning caught mid-birth bending the air. Her mouth moved, forming words that made no sound. Belle stepped closer, straining to hear, and then just beneath the hum came a whisper, a child's voice, faint but deliberate. "You came too late." The light went out. Belle froze. The fog swallowed everything. He turned, his own lantern extinguished, blind and gasping in the cold. The silence was unbearable, until it wasn't. Behind him something moved, slow dragging steps through wet earth, a breath, close, almost in his ear. He ran. When he burst through the last hedge near the village, his lantern was still clutched in his hand, but its glass was cracked, frost forming spiderwebs across it. He told no one what he'd seen, but 3 nights later, the innkeeper's wife found him standing outside, staring toward the moor, murmuring softly as if answering someone only he could hear. By the end of winter, Belle had gone missing. The villagers searched, but all they found was his lantern lying in the grass near the ruins. The glass was gone, replaced by a thin sheet of ice that did not melt, even when brought to the hearth. After that, no one dared go near the moor again after dark. But the light kept coming, sometimes alone, sometimes 2 of them now moving side by side through the fog. And though no one admitted it, every person in Hollowmere knew what it meant. The baby who never breathed had found someone who would. As the years passed, the story twisted into many shapes. Some said the light was a spirit trapped between storms, searching for the breath it never took. Others said the moor itself was cursed, that when thunder spoke that night long ago, it called something older than God. But the oldest women in the village, the ones who remembered the storm, who had seen Ellen Wren's pale face before she vanished, whispered another version. They said the baby hadn't died at all. They said she grew in the mist beneath the soil and the silence, learning to breathe through others. And when the fog returns to Hollowmere, she walks again, carrying the same cold light she was born from, waiting for the next storm to bring her home. By 1839, Hollowmere was little more than a ghost of itself. The cottages had caved in, the church lay hollow and split, and the last of the Wrens were long buried, all except one. The moors had grown wild again, swallowing paths and fences, until even the sheep kept their distance. But one thing never changed. Each winter, when frost webbed the windows and the air stung like glass, the villagers would lock their doors before dark. For that was when she came, not as a story now, but as a presence. They called her the woman in the frost. No one knew where she walked from, only that she appeared when the first ice formed on the pond near the old mill. Always the same, a slender figure drifting across the moor, her dress pale as fog, her hair loose and wet, and always barefoot even in snow. Children who saw her said she looked young but not quite right. Her face was too still, her eyes too calm, like a painted thing that forgot how to blink. Yet despite her beauty, there was something unbearably wrong in the way the air grew silent around her, like the world itself was holding its breath. It was Mrs. Carrow who first dared to speak of her. One freezing dawn in December, she said she'd seen the woman through her window, standing by the edge of the field, hands clasped, staring at the frost as if it were something holy. Her breath didn't fog the air. The frost spread wherever she stepped. By morning, the ground outside Mrs. Carrow's home was white, though it hadn't snowed that night. And in the center of that pale circle lay a small perfect handprint. The villagers whispered of curses and revenants, of lost souls unable to find peace. But some said she wasn't lost, that she was waiting. A week later, a carriage overturned on the road near Hollowmere. The driver had seen someone in the mist, a woman standing in the middle of the path. He swore her eyes caught the lantern light and reflected it back blue. He'd yanked the reins in panic, and when he looked again, she was gone. By the time help arrived, frost had already begun to bloom across the broken wheels, curling up the spokes like white veins. The driver's hands were numb, though the air wasn't cold enough to freeze, and yet the next morning the pond was solid ice. Beneath it, some claimed to see a face, not trapped, just watching. One of those who went to see was a young seamstress named Clara Hensley. She had heard the tales since childhood, stories of the Wren baby and the lantern that breathed. But when she looked into the frozen water, she swore she saw something else, a reflection not her own. It looked back at her. Clara left Hollowmere that night and walked 6 miles to the next parish, trembling and pale. When the rector there asked what she'd seen, she said only this: she's older now. But her eyes, they never learned to die. That winter the frost came early. Birds vanished from the moor. The church bell cracked. And on the coldest night of January, a traveller from Manchester took shelter in what was left of the Wren cottage, or what he thought was it. He was found the next day at the edge of the field, kneeling in the snow, alive but senseless. His hair had turned completely white. The frost beneath him was shaped like 2 bare footprints. When he was able to speak again, he told the innkeeper, "She asked me if it was still raining." No one understood what he meant, but it was enough. The parish sealed the path to the moor, and Hollowmere was abandoned for good. But legends, like frost, creep even where they're unwelcome. By 1846, Sightings of the woman had spread to nearby towns. In letters written by farmers and postmen, she appeared in small details. A girl by the hedgerow at dawn, a figure in white crossing the bridge before the river froze, a face faintly reflected in window glass though no one stood outside. And always the same. Those who saw her said the air around her shimmered, as if the frost itself bent toward her. Then came the night she entered a home. It was February 9th, during the harshest freeze in 30 years. The Mason family, with mother, father, 2 children, lived in a farmhouse on the edge of the moor. They had nailed blankets to the windows to keep out the cold. But sometime after midnight, the youngest child woke. "She's here," the little girl whispered to her brother. He rolled over, frowning. "Who?" "The lady in the window." The boy sat up. Through the small gap between the blankets, he saw her, a face pressed faintly against the glass. Not smiling, not scowling, just watching. Her hair moved as if underwater. Frost spread from where her skin touched the window, veins of ice crawling outward in perfect symmetry. The boy screamed. By the time their parents rushed in, the window was frozen solid. The woman was gone, but when they lit the lamp, the frost still bore the outline of 2 small hands. The next morning, the Masons packed what they could and left Hollowmere for good. After that, stories of her began to fade, or perhaps people simply learned not to tell them aloud. The moor grew quiet again, the frost still came, and only those who lived long enough remembered that she had ever been seen. Yet some nights, when fog rolls low across the land, travelers say they glimpse her from the corner of their eyes, a pale shape in the distance, walking against the wind, her face ageless and empty. And if you listen closely, before the cold numbs your ears, you might hear what she whispers to those who linger too long near the moor. "Did you see the storm?" By 1852, the village of Hollowmere had become little more than a name on a crumbling parish map. Only the church remained, a roofless ruin on a rise of black stone, its bell tower leaning like a weary sentinel. The villagers had fled decades ago, but time does not empty all things. Some places are never truly left behind. That winter, the new Reverend of Darnfell Parish, a determined man named Joseph Whitlock, arrived with the conviction of renewal. He had heard of Hollowmere's curse, the ghost stories whispered in alehouses about the woman who walked in frost, the child born of thunder. He dismissed them all as relics of peasant fear. "Where superstition thrives," he told his assistant, "faith has been left to rot." He vowed to rebuild the Hollowmere chapel. It took 3 men and 2 mules to haul their supplies up the old path. The air there was heavier, stiller, as though even the wind refused to linger. Snow lay thick and untouched across the graves. Their footprints were the first in years. The bell tower loomed above them, its cross long fallen, its stone blackened by lightning. Yet the bell itself remained, suspended high within the wooden frame, rimmed in frost. Reverend Whitlock stared up at it and smiled. "Even God's voice waits for us," he said, but the villagers in Darnfell had warned him. "That bell rings for the dead." The first 2 days passed quietly. They cleared the rubble, patched the lower walls, and laid firewood in the old nave. But as night fell on the 3rd day, the air began to change. The temperature dropped so suddenly, the water in their pails froze solid before dawn. The men woke to find their tools rimmed in ice. One claimed he heard breathing in the rafters, faint, steady, the rhythm of someone watching from above. Whitlock brushed it off as wind through the cracks, but that evening, as the last light fell over the moor, the first sound came, a single toll of the bell. It rolled through the valley, and deep, clear, and impossibly heavy. All 3 men froze. The rope still hung neatly coiled by the wall. No one had touched it. "Probably the frost loosening the timber," Whitlock said, forcing a laugh. But even as he spoke, a second toll came, then a third, slow, measured, funereal. When he climbed the tower, his lantern flickered with every step. The closer he came, the colder the air grew. The final ladder was slick with ice, though no snow had fallen inside. The bell swayed gently on its beam, the clapper unmoving, and then a whisper. So soft it might have been wind, but too shaped, too human. It remembers, Whitlock spun, lantern raised. Nothing, and only his own breath hanging white in the air. He told himself it was nerves, fatigue. But when he looked back at the bell, he saw it. Faint handprints, small and perfect, pressed into the frost on the metal. That night, he dreamed of snow falling inside the church. He stood among the pews as the white drifted down, each flake landing without a sound. When he looked up, he saw her, a woman standing at the altar, veiled in mist. Her hair was damp, her skin pale blue as moonlight. "You should have left it broken," she whispered. He woke to the sound of the bell tolling again. This time the others heard it too. They stumbled out of their tents, breath visible in the dark. The tower stood still against the sky, but the air around it shimmered like heat above ice. "Reverend," one of the men gasped. "It's ringing for someone." Then, from somewhere in the distance, came the echo of another bell, faint, answering. By morning, the frost had crept over everything. Their footprints from the previous day had vanished, replaced by strange patterns, circles upon circles, as if something had traced them through the night. The men refused to stay another day. Only Whitlock remained, insisting he would finish the work alone. Faith demanded courage, he said, but when he entered the church that afternoon, he found frost on the altar, and in it the shape of 2 bare feet. He followed the prints to the base of the tower. They stopped there. He hesitated, then knelt to pray. His voice shook as he whispered, "Lord, if this place be cursed, let me—" The bell rang again, cutting him off. Once, twice. Then silence. He rose slowly, heart hammering, and looked toward the doorway. A figure stood there, faint, framed in the pale light. It was her. She did not move. Her face was ageless, her eyes endless, like water frozen in glass. Frost climbed the walls behind her as she stepped forward, barefoot, her breath invisible. The air around her shimmered with the sound of something too low to be words. Whitlock fell to his knees. "What are you?" he whispered. She tilted her head. "The storm," she said softly, still waiting to breathe. And before he could speak again, she raised her hand. The bell above them tolled one last time, not struck but breathed into, the sound trembling through the stone like a sigh. The frost spread instantly, sealing the church in white. When the villagers found the place weeks later, they discovered the Reverend's journal beside the altar. The last line read, "She rang the bell herself. They buried him in the churchyard below the tower." But the frost never melted from his grave, and even now, on the coldest nights, the bell still tolls across Hollowmere, not by wind or hand, but by the breath of something that never should have lived. They say mirrors remember what eyes forget. Long after Reverend Whitlock's body froze beneath Hollowmere's ruined chapel, the frost spread beyond the valley, unseen, patient, moving through the roots of the land. By spring it had reached Thornbridge Manor. The manor stood high above the moors, a fortress of shadowed windows and quiet rooms that smelled faintly of lavender and iron. It had belonged to the Wren family for centuries, until only one remained, Eleanor Wren, a pale, sharp-eyed woman who never smiled. The servants said she wandered the halls at night, whispering to her reflection, though none dared to listen closely enough to hear what she said. One afternoon, a letter arrived, sealed with black wax, unsigned. It contained only 6 words. "She remembers you through the glass." Eleanor burned the letter. Yet that night, as she passed the old drawing room, she heard something that stopped her in her tracks. A soft hum, almost like a lullaby, coming from the far wall. It was the mirror. It stood nearly 8 feet tall, framed in tarnished silver, the glass warped with age. It had been her grandmother's, brought from Hollowmere before the village was abandoned. Its surface never quite reflected right, too deep, as though the glass looked not back at you but into you. Eleanor froze, staring. For a moment she thought she saw her reflection blink, though she hadn't. Then the whisper came, faint but unmistakable. "You left me in the cold." Her breath caught. She turned away, heart pounding, and fled up the staircase, the sound of her own footsteps echoing like another's. That night she locked the drawing-room door. But in the morning the door stood wide open. Frost had crept across the rug, spiraling toward the mirror. The servants refused to clean it. One swore she saw a handprint appear on the inside of the glass, small and blue like that of a drowned child. Another claimed she heard the bell of Hollowmere ringing faintly in the distance, though there were no churches for miles. Eleanor tried to reason with herself. "Old wood, cracked pipes draught through the chimney," she murmured as she lit a candle. Nothing more. But when she looked again into the mirror, she saw her reflection smiling, and she was not. It was subtle at first, a curl of the lips, the glint of amusement in her reflected eyes. She stepped closer, trembling. "Who are you?" she whispered. Her reflection blinked. Then the candle went out. In the blackness she heard the voice again, closer this time. "The bell still rings for us." The next morning she found Frost on her pillow, and a single word traced into it: breathe. She sent for the local curate, hoping prayer might silence whatever haunted the glass. But the man refused to enter the room. "That mirror," he said softly, "was taken from Hollowmere's chapel before it fell. The villagers say it was blessed to keep the storm outside. When they broke the bell tower, the blessing turned to hunger." Eleanor's hand shook. "Hunger," he nodded. "It shows not what is, but what was owed." That night Eleanor dreamed she stood before the mirror again. But the reflection was not hers. It was the woman from Hollowmere, white hair trailing, skin the color of frost, eyes full of drowning light. "You wear her blood," the woman whispered. "You kept the bell." Eleanor reached out, her fingers brushing the cold glass. It rippled under her touch, soft as water. When she tried to pull back, something seized her wrist from the other side. The skin burned with cold. She screamed, but no sound came. The next morning the servants found her unconscious before the mirror, her breath fogging the air. Her pulse was weak, her skin pale as bone. When they carried her to bed, she murmured only one phrase over and over: "It's colder inside the glass." For weeks, Thornbridge Manor stayed silent. Curtains drawn, fires unlit, air still as the grave. Yet every so often from the drawing-room came the faint sound of a bell, not metal but something softer, wetter, like breath against ice. Then one by one the servants began to disappear. The butler went first and last seen carrying logs toward the drawing-room. The maid vanished next, her footprints leading halfway to the mirror and then stopping abruptly. Only the housekeeper remained, too frightened to leave but too loyal to abandon her mistress. She found Eleanor one morning sitting before the mirror, smiling faintly. "It's beautiful," Eleanor whispered without turning. "What is, ma'am?" "The other side." The housekeeper stepped closer. The mirror was different now, clearer, deeper. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw her own reflection reach out before she even moved. Then she realized what she was seeing. There were faces in the glass. Dozens, pale, still, watching. Frozen in a world of white fog. "Eleanor," she gasped, "please step away." But Eleanor only smiled. Her reflection smiled wider. The glass rippled once, and she was gone. All that remained was frost, and the faint echo of a tolling bell. When the housekeeper fled that night, she swore she heard whispering from the walls, voices overlapping, murmuring the same phrase again and again like a prayer. "It remembers. It remembers. It remembers." From that day, Thornbridge Manor stood empty. The frost never melted. And on nights when the moon hangs low and colorless over the moors, travelers say the great mirror still stands in the drawing-room, its surface alive with movement, as though something inside is waiting for you to look just a little too long. Because once you do, it looks back. There are portraits that stare too long, and there are those that seem to breathe when no one is watching. After Eleanor Wren vanished into the mirror, Thornbridge Manor fell silent once again. Dust settled like snow upon the stairwells, the air turned thick with the smell of iron and oil, and the frost that once lingered at the edges of the drawing-room spread deeper into the walls, until even the fireplaces refused to burn. For years, the manor stood empty. The villagers would not go near it. They said the frost around Thornbridge never melted, not even in summer, and that the sound of a faint bell could sometimes be heard if the wind came from the north. Then came the Wren restoration. In 1832, a distant relative, Sir Nathaniel Wren, purchased the decaying estate. He was a collector of antiquities, a rational man who did not believe in superstition. To him, the manor's history was a quaint provincial myth. His wife, Margaret, however, had always been uneasy around mirrors. They brought with them their only child, Clara, 6 years old, quiet, with pale hair and large grey eyes that never seemed to blink enough. The day they arrived, Clara stood before the great hall's portrait gallery and whispered, "They're all so cold." Margaret smiled faintly. "They're only paintings, my love." But as she spoke, the lamps flickered. The gallery was lined with ancestral portraits of the Wren family, lords, ladies, and forgotten cousins painted in the dark oils of the 1700s. Near the centre hung one that Margaret had never seen listed in any inventory, a small, dust-coated canvas of a boy, perhaps 8 years old, standing beside a snow-covered field. His eyes were an odd shade of grey-blue, almost colourless. No artist's name, no inscription. That night, Clara refused to sleep in her own room. She said the boy from the wall was crying in the hall. Sir Nathaniel dismissed it. "She's imaginative. The mind of a child can play tricks in unfamiliar places." But when he returned to the gallery the next morning, the portrait was different. The boy's eyes were turned slightly, just enough to follow whoever stood in front of him. By evening, the frost had begun to creep up the lower panels of the walls again. In the nights that followed, Margaret began hearing the sound of small footsteps echoing through the halls, light, hesitant, never far behind her. She would turn and the corridor would be empty. Once, while brushing Clara's hair before bed, she caught sight of something in the mirror, a small figure standing behind her daughter, pale, barefoot, its eyes empty as snow. When she turned around, nothing was there. She said nothing to her husband. Sir Nathaniel grew obsessed with restoring the manor's forgotten art. He ordered each portrait to be cleaned, catalogued and recorded. When he came to the boy's painting, he found the canvas unusually cold to the touch, the varnish tacky as if freshly painted. Beneath the frame, scratched faintly into the wood, were the words, "He never learned to breathe." Nathaniel frowned. "Curious nonsense," he muttered, and had the frame repolished. That night Clara woke screaming. The servants found her standing before the gallery, barefoot in her nightdress, whispering to the portrait. Her breath came in small clouds, visible in the dark. "Did you see him?" she asked. "He's waiting for the bell." The next morning, frost covered the glass of every window in the gallery, except the one before the boy's portrait. The house began to feel wrong. Doors opened where no draught should reach. Mirrors fogged from within. The clock stopped at the same moment, 2:17 a.m. The exact time Reverend Whitlock's parish records had noted the Hollowmere bell last tolled before the storm took the village. Margaret's hands trembled as she read those words in the old family Bible, still left in the chapel. Beneath the Wren genealogy, someone had added a final line in faded ink. "The child in the frost watches for her." When she returned to the house, Clara was gone. They found her hours later, asleep before the gallery wall. Only the boy's portrait had changed again. Now there were 2 children in the painting, a boy and a girl, both pale, both still, both staring out as though the room beyond the canvas were their world, and you were the thing trapped inside. Sir Nathaniel ordered the portrait covered at once. He shouted at the servants, burned sage, prayed aloud though he barely remembered the words. But by midnight the covering had fallen to the floor, and in the faint candlelight the children seemed closer. Margaret refused to let Clara out of her sight after that. She noticed the girl's breath had grown faint, slow, shallow, as though the air no longer belonged to her. Clara began speaking less, only humming low songs that Margaret didn't recognize. One morning Nathaniel found her sitting before the covered portrait again, the drape lifted halfway. "What are you looking at?" he asked sharply. She turned, smiling dreamily. "At the window," she said. "They said it's open now." "There's no window," he snapped. "Yes," she whispered, "but it was painted one." Nathaniel ripped the drape down, and his heart turned to ice. The canvas was different again. The children were gone. In their place was a single open window, looking out onto a snow-covered field under a grey sky. And beneath it, faint but unmistakable, the words had changed once more. "The breath is borrowed." That evening Margaret packed to leave. "Nathaniel," she said, "there is something in that house that remembers the frost. We must go." But as she spoke they heard the faint toll of a bell, distant, hollow, impossibly near. Clara began to hum the same tune again. Her eyes turned toward the mirror in the corner of the room. Frost spread across its surface like veins. "She's calling," Clara whispered. "The glass mother," Margaret's voice broke. "Who?" Clara only smiled. The same calm, dreadful smile Eleanor Wren once wore before the mirror took her. Then the frost bloomed from the mirror to the walls, crawling across furniture, floorboards and candlelight alike, until every sound was swallowed by cold. Margaret screamed for her husband, but when he reached the room it was empty. Only Clara remained, standing before the mirror, her breath no longer visible. He ran to her, shaking her shoulders. "Clara, breathe!" She blinked slowly, her skin pale and glistening with frost. She said, "I don't have to anymore." When the servants entered later that night, they found Sir Nathaniel collapsed beside the broken mirror, his hand outstretched toward nothing. His daughter was gone. In the gallery the portrait hung uncovered, the window was closed again, and 3 children now stood inside. To this day, Thornbridge Manor remains sealed, its portraits hidden beneath sheets of dust, but travellers passing the moor at night claim that when the moon catches the frost just right, you can see faint faces in the windows, pale, silent, breathless, waiting, not haunting the house, but watching it, as though they are waiting for someone to remember the bell. There are sounds that should never travel through water, and bells are one of them. After the Wren family vanished, Thornbridge Manor was left to the frost and silence once more. The nearby village, Marrowgate, fell quiet too. Doors bolted early, candles burned low. The air grew still, as though even the birds refused to sing. And then one night, a fisherman named Elias Crowther heard the first toll. It came just before dawn, deep, distant, muffled by miles of frozen air. A bell ringing from beneath Hollowmere Lake, whose surface had been solid ice since the winter began. He thought it a dream at first, but the sound came again the next night. And the next, always at 2:17 a.m., the same hour recorded in the Wren parish death logs. By the end of that week, no one in Marrowgate slept. Elias told the innkeeper that the sound felt wrong in the bones. It was not a normal chime, but something heavier, a pulse beneath the water, as though something vast and forgotten was moving under the ice. The older villagers whispered that the lake had once been the heart of Hollowmere itself, before the storm swallowed the village whole and left only water in its place. Children were forbidden from going near it. The fishermen stopped casting nets, but curiosity, that old cursed instinct, still lingered in a few. On the 8th night, Elias and his brother Thomas walked to the lake with lanterns. The moon was a thin silver hook, barely lighting the way. The surface of the water gleamed pale and smooth, like a mirror stretched across eternity. Frost hung in the air like dust. "Do you hear it?" Elias whispered. Thomas nodded, his face ashen. It's not ringing from beneath. It's ringing through the ice. Then they saw it, faint, distorted, a shape moving beneath the frozen surface, like a figure, pale and small, drifting slowly toward the shore. Thomas dropped his lantern. The sound of the bell deepened, closer now, as if answering their fear. And then, without warning, the ice cracked. A hairline fracture shot across the surface, stopping just before their boots. From within the break rose a single bubble, small, grey, and cold enough to smoke in the air. When it burst, it released a whisper so faint Elias thought he imagined it. "The children are waking." By morning, the village found Thomas's body half buried in frost near the shore, his lungs filled with icy water, though the lake itself had not melted. Elias lived but spoke no more. He sat by the window of his home, staring toward Hollowmere, his eyes cloudy as glass. The bell continued to ring each night. Then came the fog. It rolled in from the moor, thick and low, swallowing fields, paths, and even light itself. Within it, travelers reported hearing the laughter of children, high, echoing, carried by the wind. The tolling bell blended with their laughter, until no one could tell where one ended and the other began. In the village church, the vicar found frost forming around the baptismal font, delicate patterns like veins or roots, pulsing faintly. He heard soft knocking beneath the stone floorboards, rhythmic, patient, like someone drumming their fingers beneath the earth. He sealed the church doors by morning, but the frost crept on. By the second week, every mirror in Marrowgate had gone dim. The glass fogged from the inside, and faint outlines began to appear, the shapes of faces, pale and open-eyed. One child, Eliza Thornton, told her mother that she had been speaking with the lake boy. "What does he say, darling?" her mother asked nervously. "He says we have his name." "What name?" Eliza blinked. Wren, rumors spread quickly. The villagers gathered outside Thornbridge Manor with torches, desperate to burn whatever remained. But when they approached the gates, their fires went out one by one. The frost was already there. Inside the manor, the portraits were no longer still. Some swore they saw eyes moving within the painted faces. Others claimed the glass in the drawing room pulsed like breathing. And in the heart of the grand hall, where the great mirror once stood, a wet, glistening crack now spread across the marble floor, leading toward the lake. It was not a break. It was a passage. The following evening, a small procession of villagers gathered at the water's edge, determined to silence the bell. They carried ropes, tools, and holy relics, muttering prayers through chattering teeth. The ice was thinner now. The center of the lake shimmered with a faint blue glow, deep and unnatural. When they reached it, one of the men knelt and pressed his ear to the ice. His breath fogged the surface, revealing for a heartbeat something beneath, a dark mass large as a house, shaped like a sunken bell tower. He recoiled, gasping. "The chapel," he whispered. "It's still down there." And as if hearing him, the bell tolled again, so loud the ice trembled beneath their feet. The glow brightened, and then, faintly, they saw them, dozens of pale faces rising beneath the surface, all looking upward, their mouths open in perfect silence. Children, the villagers, screamed. The ice split like glass struck by a hammer. In moments, the center of Hollowmere Lake swallowed them whole. The next morning, the fog had lifted. The frost was gone. The lake looked calm, undisturbed. But where the ice had broken, faint ripples lingered, and steady, circular, almost rhythmic. At the center, something glimmered faintly beneath the water. It was the bell, and it was swinging. That night, those few who still remained in Marrowgate said they dreamed of water, of black depths filled with voices that hummed old lullabies. They saw faces pressed against the inside of glass, eyes wide, mouths moving without breath. And somewhere far below, a woman stood in the drowned chapel, her white hair floating like mist. In her hands she held the cracked bell rope, pulling it gently, her mouth curved in that same faint smile. Eleanor Wren had come home. Now, When winter returns to Hollowmere, travelers say the fog carries sound differently. It doesn't echo, it listens. And if you stop near the lake and hold your breath, you can hear the faint tolling of the bell from beneath the ice. Once, twice, then silence. But if you listen long enough, you'll hear the whisper that follows. There's still room in the mirror. They say winter fell all at once that year, as if the air itself remembered how to die. By mid-December, Hollowmere Lake had turned the color of rusted iron. It did not freeze slowly, nor crackle beneath moonlight like other winters past. It simply stopped moving. One evening it was water. By dawn, it was a sheet of red glass, smooth and cold as blood left to harden. Marrowgate awoke to silence. Even the wind refused to speak. Those who dared to step outside found frost crawling up their windows from the inside, forming shapes, spirals, circles, faces. The air held a smell like wet stone and old metal. The church bell, long rusted, long silent, rang once on its own, though no one had touched it in decades. Something in the valley had changed. At the inn, the few who still remained alive or sane enough to talk gathered by the dim fire. Old Martha Kelling, the innkeeper's mother, stared toward the window and whispered, "It's the lake's blood. It remembers what was promised." Beside her, Elias Crowther, pale and trembling, still said nothing. Since his brother's death, he hadn't spoken a word, only traced the same shape again and again on the table with his finger. A circle, a line through its center, and a single dot above. When asked what it meant, he looked up at last, his lips barely moving. The mark she wears. At sunset, the light died faster than usual. The red glow from the lake seemed to pulse faintly, spreading a soft shimmer across the snow. Some said they saw figures walking along the frozen surface, small shapes hand in hand, leaving no footprints behind. The first to vanish was the vicar. He'd gone to ring the church bell, hoping to drive back whatever had taken root in the valley. But when the villagers went looking, they found him kneeling at the altar, his hands frozen together in prayer. His eyes were open, staring toward the baptismal font, where water had turned to ice, and inside the ice was something small, pale and curled as if something had grown there. That night, Margaret Wren's old journal surfaced, found by a gravedigger, who'd unearthed it near the edge of the manor garden. The ink was blurred, the pages water-stained, but one passage remained clear. The frost does not take the living. It replaces them. No one understood what she meant. Not yet. By midnight, the frost began to spread across the sky. It wasn't snow, it was ash. White, light, and faintly glowing, drifting down in perfect silence. It didn't melt when it touched skin. It burned cold, leaving marks shaped like fingerprints. Children woke screaming in their beds, saying they could hear the bell under their pillows. Mirrors darkened. Candles flickered out. And from far across the moor, the faint sound of a lullaby began, soft, humming, familiar to no one yet remembered by everyone. "Sleep, little one, the wind will keep. Sleep till the frost forgets to weep." In the early hours, Elias wandered to the lake once more. The villagers begged him not to go. He smiled faintly, as though hearing something far away. "She's calling," he said. "The children are cold." He carried no lantern this time, only a small bell, the kind one might find on a child's toy. He walked until the red ice shimmered beneath him like glass. His reflection was pale and wrong, like something drawn in reverse. Then, faintly, the ice beneath his feet began to move, not crack, breathe. It rose and fell with slow, wet motion like a chest expanding. From beneath, pale hands pressed against the surface, dozens of them, fingers spread wide as if begging for air. The red hue deepened, shifting like a wound reopening. And then, the bell beneath the lake rang, louder than before, closer. The sound rippled through the valley, shaking the trees, cracking the windows of Thornbridge Manor. Every mirror in Marrowgate shattered at once. Those who survived said the air became heavy, too heavy to breathe. The sky bled white light, and when they looked toward the lake, they saw Eliza standing still, surrounded by the figures of children, their eyes hollow and mouths open, as though they were singing a hymn no one else could hear. The lake convulsed, and then it was over. When the dawn came, Hollowmere Lake had frozen solid once again, smooth, perfect, untouched. But the color was gone. It was now clear as glass, reflecting only the pale grey of the morning sky. There was no sign of Elias Crowther, but beneath the ice, faintly one could see something gleaming, a bell, and beside it a small hand reaching upward. By spring, the frost withdrew. Birds returned. Life crept back into Marrowgate, slow and uncertain, as though the earth itself was deciding whether to forgive or to wait. The lake remained still, until one night in April, when a travelling merchant from Leighton Hollow crossed through the valley. He stopped at the water's edge to rest his horse. The surface was so smooth it reflected the moon perfectly, and just as he turned to leave, the reflection changed. The moon became an eye, and the water began to bleed. He was found days later, his cart abandoned, his horse missing, his boots frozen to the ground. On his forehead was a small mark, a circle, a line, and a dot. In his clenched hand was a shard of glass. When the constable pried it open, the glass shimmered faintly, showing not his reflection, but that of a small child smiling faintly in the dark. The people of Marrowgate no longer speak of the lake. They built fences, then walls, then eventually left altogether. The manor fell into ruin, half buried in frost and vines, but every year, when the air turns thin and the first frost touches the earth, the water in Hollowmere glows faintly red again, and if you stand by the shore and listen, truly listen, you'll hear it. The bell. Soft, patient, ancient, calling someone home. The year was 1899, and the road to Marrowgate was no longer on any map. Snow swallowed it decades ago, along with the people who had once called it home. The manor, the church, even the little bridge by the Willow Creek, all gone. Only the lake remained, still and cruelly perfect, like a mirror for something that should never have been reflected. Clara Whitby had heard the stories since childhood. The frost that remembers, her grandmother used to whisper by the fire. But unlike others who shuddered and crossed themselves, Clara was drawn to it, to the mystery, to the unspoken. She was a journalist now, 28, bold, unmarried, and proud of it. The sort of woman London's gentlemen called too clever for comfort. When she found the mention of Hollowmere Lake buried in an old church ledger, she knew it was the story she'd been waiting for. The entry was dated December 18th, 1854. The frost fell upon them. The water no longer forgives. And signed beneath it, Margaret Wren. Clara arrived at dusk, the air thick with the hush of snow. The carriage driver refused to go past the old mill road. "No man crosses Hollowmere after dark," he muttered, eyes darting toward the fog. So she went on foot. The forest was skeletal, branches like ribs reaching through the mist. Her boots crunched on the frost-bitten ground, echoing too loudly in the stillness. Every so often she thought she heard a faint chiming, soft, metallic, almost like a bell carried on the wind. When she reached the lake, she stopped. It was vast, eerily flat, untouched by ripples or snow. The moon hung low above it, silver and watchful. But what froze her wasn't the silence. It was the reflection. The moon's light didn't reach her side of the shore. Yet, in the reflection, the other side of the lake blazed with lanterns, dozens of them. She blinked. The lights vanished. The old inn still stood, barely. Its windows were boarded, its sign half buried in frost. Clara forced the door open, coughing as dust billowed into the air. Inside, she found a chair overturned, a fireplace stuffed with dead birds, and, on the mantel, a journal wrapped in cloth. The first page was brittle but legible. December 20th, the lake took the vicar tonight. His eyes were open, he saw her. December 21st, the children hum when the wind blows. Their mouths don't move. Clara flipped through, each line more frantic, ink smeared by tears or blood. Then, near the end, a passage underlined twice. She walks when the frost bleeds red. She wears no face, only memory. Clara's lamp flickered. She froze, realizing the wind had stopped. No, not stopped. Changed. It wasn't air anymore. It was whispering, a low rhythmic murmur rising from beneath the floorboards, like a lullaby sung through teeth. Clara fled into the night, clutching the journal. The lake glowed faintly ahead, a dull crimson under the snow. And then she saw her. At first, just a shape beneath the ice, a woman's outline, hair drifting like ink. But as Clara stepped closer, the figure's head turned. The face beneath the ice was her own, pale, eyes open, lips moving. "Clara," it whispered, not through air, but through her bones. The sound crawled up her spine, a vibration inside her skull. She stumbled back, gasping, as the ice beneath her feet cracked in a perfect circle. The sound wasn't like breaking glass. It was like the surface was breathing. From the center of the circle, a hand rose. Blue-white skin, long fingers, nails sharp as glass. It didn't reach for her. It pointed toward the woods. Clara ran. Branches clawed her coat, her breath steaming in sharp bursts. She didn't stop until she reached what looked like a half-collapsed shed near the tree line. She pushed the door open and screamed. Inside were portraits, hundreds of them nailed to the walls, floor to ceiling, some painted, some drawn in charcoal, some scratched into the wood itself. All of the same woman. No face, only a blank oval where eyes and mouth should be. And underneath every portrait the same symbol, a circle, a line and a dot, the mark of Elias Crowther. She backed away, and her heel struck something. She turned her lantern down. It was a small silver bell, half buried in snow. When she picked it up, it chimed softly, one clear, perfect note that rang too long. And from deep within the trees, something answered. By the time she reached the inn again, the sky was bleeding white. Snowflakes hung in the air without falling. Her reflection in the window didn't move when she did. She looked closer. The reflection blinked. Anne smiled. Clara screamed and stumbled back, knocking over her lamp. The flame caught the old drapes. Fire spread fast, licking at the walls, filling the air with smoke and the scent of burned wood and feathers. Through the haze, she saw it. Again, the woman from the lake standing in the doorway, drenched and silent. The firelight shimmered through her, like light passing through ice. "Who are you?" Clara gasped, covering her mouth. The woman tilted her head. Her voice was distant, as if spoken through frozen water. "I am what the lake remembers." And then she raised her hand. Every portrait in the inn turned its head toward Clara. Hundreds of blank faces staring, watching. The bell rang again, louder, deeper, shaking the floorboards. The fire died in an instant. Darkness swallowed the room. When morning came, travelers from Leighton Hollow found the inn reduced to ash. No body was ever recovered. Only Clara's journal, pages half burned but one line untouched. She wasn't drowning. She was waiting. And beneath it, drawn faintly in soot, a circle, a line, and a dot. Weeks later, a fisherman claimed he saw a woman walking on the lake's surface at twilight, not standing on the ice, within it. He swore she was looking up through the frozen mirror, her eyes following him as he walked the shore. He ran home and told his wife. She laughed and said, "What did she look like?" He opened his mouth to answer, but couldn't, because for a moment he couldn't remember her face or his own. They say the thaw came early that year. The snows melted before spring, flooding the valleys and turning the land into glassy pools. But in Hollowmere, the lake didn't melt. It gleamed harder, brighter, as though something beneath it refused to let go. And that was when the bell was found. It was June of 1901, almost 2 years since Clara Whitby vanished. The town had long stopped speaking her name. Her articles had been pulled from the papers, her family gone north to forget her. Only the children whispered about her, that she had tried to talk to the frost and it answered. The one who found the bell was a boy named Samuel Dean, 9 years old, barefoot and curious, chasing frogs near the riverbank. The sunlight was thick and golden that morning, and the air smelled of new grass. But he said the ground felt cold even in the sun. He heard the bell before he saw it, a faint chime so thin it could have been mistaken for a bird's cry. It was lying on the mud, half buried, its surface blackened as if scorched. Samuel picked it up. The sound stopped. Then, slowly, the reflection in the water shifted. He swore he saw a woman's hand pressed against the underside of the surface. By nightfall, Hollowmere was colder than it should have been. A frost crept in across the windows, delicate as lace. At first no one minded. They said it was just the weather turning strange again, the way it always did near the lake. But when Samuel's mother found his footprints leading to the lake at midnight, and only one set coming back, the fear returned. The next morning, the boy sat silent at the kitchen table, his hands folded around the blackened bell. He didn't speak, didn't blink much. When his mother asked him what had happened, he whispered, "She told me not to breathe." The following week, animals stopped drinking from the river. Their reflections would twitch and ripple, though the water was still. The vicar's wife said she saw a pale figure standing behind her in the wash basin mirror. No face, only long hair floating in water. A farmer found his well frozen solid from the inside, the ice smooth as polished glass. And on every surface that reflected light, mirrors, ponds, windows, there appeared the faint impression of fingertips. The stories spread fast, reaching even the capital. A few journalists came, but none stayed long. One of them, a man named Dorian Hale, sent only a single telegram before vanishing too. Not fog, not water, its memory made solid. After that, the parish sealed the lake road again. They said it was for safety, though everyone knew better. But the frost doesn't respect fences. By early autumn, the mirrors in the neighbouring town of Weirford began fogging at night. People would wake to see the outline of a woman behind them, standing just beyond the reflection, never visible when they turned. Some claimed they could hear the sound of a bell in their sleep, soft and steady like a heartbeat in the walls. Others said their children had started humming, a low, tuneless lullaby, and when asked where they learned it, they'd say, "She told me." In December, Samuel Dean disappeared again. This time for good. They found the bell beside the frozen pond behind his house, half submerged in the ice. Inside the ice, and they swore, was the faint shadow of a woman holding the boy's hand. The constable called it a reflection. But no one went near that pond again. Winter bled into the next year. The trees stayed bare. The frost stayed white. And though the towns changed names and new roads were built, locals still say the cold there feels wrong. Not sharp or bitter, and just watching. They say that if you go near the lake on the longest night of the year and breathe on the ice, you can see her beneath it, drifting just below the surface. She doesn't move at first. She waits, and when your breath fades, you'll see your own reflection. Smile. A letter was found decades later in the archives of a ruined church north of Hollowmere. It was unsigned, written in faded ink, but the handwriting matched Clara Whitby's. It read, "The frost is not death. It is remembrance. It keeps what time forgets." She was never drowning, she was watching. And now so am I. Beneath it, faint and burned into the paper, was the same mark, a circle, a line, and a dot. Now every few winters, when the lake freezes too quickly and the air turns strange, villagers say you can still hear the faint ringing of that bell. sometimes just once, sometimes again and again, until it feels like it's coming from inside your own chest, and if you listen too closely, if you dare lean over the ice, you might see a reflection blink back before you. So that was the year the frost never left. And though the children sing their lullabies by new fires, the elders still whisper the old words when the nights grow long. Beware the mirror lake. It remembers what breath forgets, and somewhere beneath that glass-cold water, a woman's voice hums softly, timeless, patient, and waiting. The bell rings once, then silence forever.